I would like to share a story with you tonight, and this particular story comes from the country of Greece. I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to go to this beautiful country, but I'd like to share a story that is recorded from a long, long time ago. So if you just maybe close your eyes if you want to for a minute and imagine stepping back 100 years, maybe a couple more 100 years. There's no more iPhones, no more aeroplanes, no more cars and trucks. We'll step back to the time of about 500 BC and pick up a story from one of my favourite historians. There was a gentleman by the name of Periander. He had a lot of things going for him. He was a ruler of a powerful city-state. He was very successful in his campaigns. People were enjoying a time of wealth and prosperity. I can only imagine at the time that interest rates were much more favourable than they are for us today. And people were living a life of great wealth and prosperity. He had lavish parties, plenty of booze, and great music. But in his time and place, one of the most prized possessions in his entourage was his musician. His musician was not just locally famous, his musician was world famous. And on the picture on the screen up here on your left, you will see there's a bust that was actually created by his countrymen probably a short time after he lived. This musician of his, Periander's musician, didn't just play the lyre, he owned it. He had some serious talent. His talent was so good, it was reputed that when this gentleman played, he could invoke the gods. Wow. That was the story. One day, they had, you've probably seen on TV, Britain's Got Talent or was it American Idol, X Factor. They had one of these, a Sicily edition. And Periander had a brilliant idea. He said to himself, I know what I'll do. I will send my main man. I'm sure he will do very well. And Periander's musician had also been composing a special new song that Periander was thinking, this is sure to impress. They didn't have aeroplanes in those days, so Periander's musician had to hop onto a ship and sail across probably 2 or 3 days or so across the sea from Corinth around the bottom, sailing westward towards Sicily. And you can imagine when Periander's musician got there, he caused quite a stir. It was no surprise that when it came to the final event, the final evening, this musician played like he was a man possessed. He won the grand prize and he picked up a massive sum of money. Now, in those days, when you won a lot of money, you can guess how it was received. They didn't have credit cards and bank transfers. They had bags of money. And Periander's musician was loaded with some serious cash when he won that final that evening. Now, unfortunately, times haven't changed a lot because just like the modern times, people back then were worried about being victims of robbery. And so Periander's musician thought to himself, how am I going to get this loot back home? How am I going to get back to my place and not have to sacrifice too much to some bandits along the way? So he had a very good idea. He said, I know what I'll do. I'm going to go to the port, to the wharf, and I'm going to find a ship that has a flag that comes from where I come from. In the Pacific Islands, we say it's a one-talk, someone who speaks the same language. Those will be my mates. They come from where I come from. They wouldn't take advantage of me, would they? So he hopped on this boat. It was a Corinthian ship, and he sailed with his crewmen, or with the crewmen on the ship, back home. A very, very, very happy man. Here is a is a bit of a computer-generated graphic. This is an indication of the kind of ship that they may have had in those days. It looks like everybody got a first-class seat in those days. So that was good. Unfortunately, and this is where the story gets a bit sad, in the middle of the ocean, Periander was rudely aroused from his blissful reflections by a couple of angry voices. "Oi, oi," they said. "You've got a lot of money, haven't you?" And of course, it's very hard to be a secret surprise when you have cash loaded. This guy had specially hired this ship to go home after all, and they knew that he had some serious cash. The rough sailors came to the musician and said, "We have two choices for you. Which one's it going to be?" Choice number one: how about you get a knife and run yourself through, and we'll promise to give you an honourable burial when we get to the shore. That's option number one, and the musician's thinking, that's not such a good option. I wonder what the option two is. Option number two was, you can jump into the ocean. And of course, this guy couldn't swim. I don't know what you would do with a choice like that. Are you going to take yourself out, or are you going to jump into the ocean and let the ocean take you out? This musician had a bit of a think about this, and he agonized, and he came up with an idea. He said, "Gentlemen, before I jump into the sea, I would like to play one last song for you." And so he did. The sailors were rapt. This guy, as I said, could play the lyre like he was a man possessed. And as he played this instrument, as the story goes, the men were captivated by the power of his music. They were so impressed. They were honoured to be personal attendants in the audience of this master musician. The song ended way too soon, and unfortunately, as soon as the song ended, the steely men regained their resolve. They said, "All right, time's up, time to jump into the sea." Arion stood up, still holding his lyre, dressed in all of his fancy performance regalia, and he jumped into the sea. Would his divine powers be enough to save him? I happen to have a background in flying, and I'll come back to the story in just a minute with Periander's musician, but I'd like to just introduce to you the finer art of parking an aeroplane. Aeroplanes are pretty hard to park accurately. Flying along in cruise is pretty easy because we have all kinds of equipment for precise navigation. We can navigate very precisely en route, but when it comes to parking, that takes a bit of magic, a bit of luck. This picture here, you can see two pictures of a nose wheel of an aeroplane. One's a front-on view, and the other one is a side view. And those are the same picture of the same aeroplane parked in the same location. And my friend, a colleague of mine, took this photo. Now, the reason this photo is very special, maybe you can tell me, what's so good about this picture? He's spot on. How often do you think that happens? Yeah. Even the good ones are very happy if they can get it plus or minus 6 inches on a regular basis. To get it spot on like this is good enough that it's worth posting on Facebook, even if you're a professional. And so he did post it on Facebook. Before we do that, just look at that little circle aeroplane image in the middle of the screen. Watch what happens as it parks into spots. There it goes. And the trick is to get your nose wheel lined up and a beam, keeping in mind that you cannot see anything. You cannot see the nose wheel because your cockpit view is out in the distance. There's a guy waving the tennis, what do you call it, table tennis bats, the paddles to guide us in, but it's still a bit imprecise. If you saw this, if you as a professional pilot saw this aeroplane parked there, what would your suspicion be? Do you think it was fluke or do you think it was skill? I'm a pilot, I'd say it's fluke. All right. There's the picture out the front. This is what you can see as a pilot, several meters up in the air. What can you see of the nose wheel? There's nothing. It's complete guesswork. It's like trying to park a car in a car park without all these fancy cameras you got in the, reversing cameras and stuff. Try and do that without all that and park within, 1/2 of a centimetre of the curb, or whatever. It's really hard. Okay, cool. So here the guy. The guy, this friend of mine, he's a good pilot, by the way, but he was so impressed with this performance, he posted it on Facebook, and you can imagine all the comments he got. He's Australian, so you can imagine the Australian humour that he got. Okay, so we've got various comments, and you can see that maybe it's a bit too small to see there, but someone said marshallers, the guy waving the paddles, maybe they were the ones that were the reason that you were so accurate. It wasn't your skill, it was somebody else. Somebody else said, are you pointing in the wrong direction? That little L shape, they're making fun of him. Maybe it was, you thought you were spot on, but you're spot on in the wrong direction. So you're just making a bit of fun there. Somebody else said, the force is strong with you. Beware of the force, some supernatural connection. That must be why you park so good. And once again, all of these reasons is pointing the credit to somewhere else, not to my friend, right? Because everybody knows it's coincidental, it's a fluke, it's brilliant. Someone said doing lines again. In other words, maybe you parked the aeroplane first and then you got the paintbrush out and drew that nice and accurate. Nice job, Captain, well done. Just making fun of him, eh? And someone else said, well, it must have been the engineers. They do a good job too, so it must be somebody else. Whatever the case, it's not you. And so on and so forth. What can we learn from this Facebook post? What did we pick up from that? Obviously, the question is, how did he get to park that aeroplane so precisely? That's the question. All right, so we'll just jump forward to my party trick magician tonight. If you wanted to really impress your mates, imagine with me for a minute, what would be the ultimate party trick? If you could do something really, really amazing to impress your mates, what could it be? What would it be? If you could maybe get a coin and disappear, pop it in your pocket, maybe if you had a rabbit and pulled it out of a hat, maybe if you could play a musical instrument like Periander's musician there, what would it take for you, do you think, what kind of magic tricks would it take for you to really impress your friends? Just imagine for a minute that I've got a bow and arrow, I pull it back and I shoot the arrow, hit the wall, and then I go out and get a paintbrush and paint a bullseye. How impressive would that shot be, do you think? Give me a score 0 to 10. If I get a bullseye, perfect, by drawing a bullseye after the arrow's landed on the mark. How good is that, do you think? Any good? 0, 10? 0, very good. Okay, now, let's draw the target on the wall over here, blindfold myself, spin around 3 times, shoot at random, and then hit that target. How good's that? Okay, what if I did it just once? Would you say fluke or skill? Fluke or skill if it happened just once? Fluke. What if I got a hole-in-one in golf? Never played golf before, but I get a hole-in-one. Fluke or skill? Obviously it's fluke. But if I did it every day, if I went every single day and kept on getting hole-in-ones, you'd be thinking, boy, this guy's got more, he's got the force with him. He's got something going on there. All right. And there's that picture of that cockpit. You can't see the wheel and still getting that precision. How did my mate get to park that aeroplane? That'll be the question. I want to introduce you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, to one of the most amazing lines in the pavement ever drawn. This piece of paper, actually it's a piece of goat skin that we're looking at here, is so old that it was even made before I was born, before you were born, before your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were born. It was even before the Roman Empire existed in strength that this was in place. This particular document has been dated in several different ways. One way it's been dated is what we call by paleographic technique. That means we look at the letters, we look at the forms, the way the handwriting is done, the kind of ink, and using that kind of analysis, scholars agree we're looking at between about 356 and 103 BCE, somewhere in that ballpark. Plus or minus, there's a bit of a range, but definitely well before the before Common Era split. The second way of dating this particular manuscript is to use radiocarbon dating. And I've got a list of scholars here who did this. If you look at the radiocarbon journal, a bunch of scholars here, Donahue, Broshy, Tov, they've come up with a range of between about 150 and 100 BCE by carbon dating. So the carbon dating and the paleographic dating are matching for this document. Now, it just so happens this document has a name, and it's called the Great Isaiah Scroll. It was found in 1947, but it was dated, as I just said, to between 100 and 350 BCE. That's at least 2,100 years ago, quite possibly a bit more than that. And the question is, if I shoot an arrow and hit a target and then draw the target after the fact, we've already agreed that's a 0 out of 10, but if I happen to shoot an arrow and hit a target that was there for 2,200 years, you'd be kind of thinking a bit, wouldn't you? I certainly have been. And I want to just introduce to you what I've come across just briefly tonight. If you see a little red circle on the screen there, I don't know if you can see the top right-hand corner. We're going to have a look at the text on that part of the scroll first. We'll look at some other parts too, but I'm going to go straight to the top right-hand corner and have a bit of a zoom in. This particular passage is in column 6 of the scroll, and it happens to be a passage where, according to the writer, and there's a bit of debate about who that writer was, but according to the writer, his God is getting a bit frustrated. His God is getting a bit upset. If you look at the very top of the screen, you'll see brown and the black writing. You're actually looking at the original. If you were to go to this museum today, you can't touch it because it's behind glass, but you can go right up to the glass case, and if you were allowed to touch through the glass, you could actually get close to a document that's 2,200 years old. That ink predates, as I said, predates the Common Era. And if you look at the white box with the black lettering inside, that's modern Hebrew, because this is written in Hebrew. Look at the shapes and tell me that I've been honest here. Did I match the text correctly? Did I correctly transcribe from the top to the middle? Did I make mistakes? Can you see that I've been fair tonight? I want you to see with your own eyes that we are not just making stuff up, but we're actually looking at a particular document that's 2,100 plus years old. Any questions? Did I miss anything? There's a couple of little interesting spelling differences. I'll try and point one out if I can. Right up about here, there's a little spelling difference right there. That word that I've been blocking, but it's the same word. Okay, so what does this text actually say? Let's just read it together. Well, I'll just read it to you. This is God speaking. He says, "Listen, house of David, is it not enough that you," and there's a bit of a question mark about the word there, "you people must you weary my God also." And there's another part of this passage that says, "Therefore the Lord himself will," you see the red and the orange there, there's a bit of missing part in that scroll because it was a bit damaged. But the white stuff there we do see, "The young woman has conceived and is bearing a son. His name will be Emmanuel," which means God is with us. Now, as I said, the part that's in red and orange we're a bit unsure about. More recent manuscripts kind of give us a clue as what those words could be. But if we want to be skeptical for a minute and withhold our judgment, we could say, well, we don't know. It could be something else. It could be gobbledygook. It could be, I don't know, yellow. It could be just some other word in there. So you've got to have enough space to put in the word that you want to put in there, and you can see how big the gaps are. So we'll just keep that in mind. Now, let's take this with a grain of salt, because I've got a skeptical background. I am not sure that I can trust some person's opinion on something. Maybe somebody got things wrong. Maybe they have been disingenuous in how they've treated things. So let's just have a look at this next passage, but put some evaluation on. Maybe this is just a possibility. Let's have two options, as Dr. Pandit said. Let's give ourselves opportunity to go either way. This is a passage written about, and there's a bit of discussion about the dating, but it'd be at least 200 to 300 years after the Isaiah scroll we just looked up. And it just says this, "But when he had considered this, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child who has been conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, and there's the direct quote, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child, shall bear a son, they shall call his name Emmanuel," which means, or translated means, God with us. That sounds kind of bizarre. It's kind of like parking an aeroplane. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe it was a fluke, maybe somebody had a good day, or a lucky one. However, there were quite a lot of other people at the same time that said something similar. I'll introduce you to a guy, Ignatius of Antioch, and there's been two different schools of thought who have preserved his writing. So we have a discrepancy today between the two schools of Ignatius. I'll give you both versions of the manuscript and you can have a look to yourself how they match up. On the left and on the right are the two versions of the manuscript. Look at the key colours there. Blue, the seed of David; orange, the Son of God; pink, the Virgin Mary; and green, as a fulfillment of a prior expectation. Two different manuscripts, two different schools, but they agree on the important bits. There's 5 other early church fathers who are Christians. These are all, as I said, very early. Different parts, Egypt, we have Greece, we have throughout the Mediterranean, and all of these people sort of felt the same way. They said, hey, this old prediction that must have predated the event was written first, and then something happened, and we thought, hey, this must be what was talked about ahead of time. A prior expectation has been met. Now, I can guess what you're thinking. Well, they're all Christians, right? They're all biased. Let's not give evidence from a biased witness. You want to have a third-party witness in the court of law, somebody who does not share your worldview. All right, fair enough. So we'll look at the Quran. The Quran is from my dear Muslim friends, and they obviously have some very important views and some different views, but in this particular passage we have the same view, which I find to be very interesting. And I'm sorry the screen is just a bit hard to see there. The Arabic is important because the Quran is only the Quran if it's in Arabic. I don't read Arabic, I'm sorry. If someone else does, you're welcome to help me out. But the English translation, hopefully you can see there, says Mary is approached by the angel Gabriel, according to the Quran. And the angel says she's going to be expecting, she's going to be having a baby, and she says, that cannot be. And in the text here it says, how can I have a boy while no man has touched me and I have not been unchaste? I've been faithful. How can this happen? And in the second line it says, the angel replied, thus it will be, your Lord says, it is easy for me, and we will make him a sign to the people and a mercy from us, and it is a matter already decreed. Now that word sign is very interesting because in the Hebrew text, a lot of my scholarly friends who are a little bit skeptical will say, well, that young virgin that shall conceive, that could be a maiden, right? It could be just any old girl that had a baby, and that's nothing special at all. But the thing that's interesting in the Quran is the Quran says this conception would be a sign. Remember the text itself in Isaiah said, God was frustrated with his people, therefore, because of God's frustration, he would give a sign that would indicate. This word sign here, ayatan, can mean a flag or a mark, a marking. It's something significant. If any old lady got pregnant and had a child, what's significant about that? It's good for the family, but why would that be newsworthy? Something special's got to be happening for that birth to be noteworthy. So just a quick recap. We have the text itself clearly predating an event, then we have a whole bunch of people that say, yeah, we think that was the fulfillment of that sign. We think there was a prediction first, we think there was a fulfillment later. And in specific reference here, the house of David, affirmed there by the Gospels, Ignatius, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement, Tertullian, and Origen, and of course in the Quran. Now, as we said before, if someone gets a hole-in-one once, if we park an aeroplane lucky once, we say, hey, great, what are the chances? Great fluke. You won the lotto last night, congratulations. But it takes more than that to convince somebody, doesn't it? It takes more than that to convince me. If I got lucky once, I'd say, ha, I got a strike in bowling, that's great. Probably couldn't do it twice, but I did it once. Let's go back to Periander. He's jumped off the ship, and what happened? We want to find out. As Periander's musician fell into the sea, he thought his life was over. He had all of his regalia on. You see, this picture's a bit of an artist impression. This is obviously painted by somebody who didn't see a dolphin in real life. This is supposed to be a dolphin. It was drawn by a European in the 18th century, I think. So it looks like a pig to me with a tail on it, because they probably had pigs in Europe in those days. So that's supposed to be a dolphin, and that instrument is supposed to be a lyre, so L-Y-R-E. So go ahead and use your imagination. This artist clearly did also. The musician landed into the sea. His music had been so powerful, so strong, according to the story, that he was able to conjure up a dolphin. And there's the picture. The dolphin rescues the musician. The musician's name is Arion. If you drive a Toyota Arion today, you can thank this man for your car's brand name. As he was carried to shore, he was very relieved. He didn't have his money, but he had his lyre, he had his fancy performance costume, and he was alive. He got to shore and he kissed the ground. He thanked the gods and he got passage back to Corinth. When he got to Corinth, who would be the first person that he'd want to see? Periander. Hey, Periander, I have a tale of woe to share with you. I was coming back home on a ship, and my friends, and I'm sure he knew the names, the author Herodotus doesn't tell us, but I'm pretty sure he knew the names. These gentlemen gave me an ultimatum, and I was forced to jump into the sea. But Periander, the gods be praised, I was rescued from the depths by a dolphin. Do you think Periander believed the story? Nah. Periander's a skeptic, right? Periander says, you're dreaming, mate. What a bunch of rubbish. I don't believe stories like that. Arion said, but it's true. Go to the port, and when this ship comes in, ask them where I am. So, Periander went to the wharf, and when the ship came in from Sicily, Periander said to the crew, where's my musician Arion? Oh, sir, most honourable sir. And there's two versions of the story, so I don't know which one's true, but according to one version of the story, the crew said, hey, he had a change in plans. He sent his treasure with us, but he wanted to stay behind and take care of some business. So he is still back in Tartanum, or another port. According to another version of the story, they said, oh, Periander, live forever. He got sick on the boat, and we had to bury him. So he was unwell. We are very sorry, but he passed away. But we have his treasure here for you, O King, live forever. At the agreed command, Periander waved his hand, and Arion came out from behind the bushes, much to the dismay of the sailors. Periander now knew that Arion was a man possessed. The sailors were mortified. Where did he come from? The story quickly spread. Arion is in touch with the gods. Arion, when he plays his lyre, even the natural world listens to him. And of course the sailors suffered capital punishment. My question to you is, how impressed are you with Arion? Is he good? Is he magical? Does he have skills? What is it that makes somebody truly gifted? What makes it truly the case that someone is inspired by the gods? Does Arion's story count? And by the way, in case you're not sure about the story, most scholars today would see this story as a little bit legendary. Most people wouldn't believe this to be a true story. And of the 5 nights this week, this is the only story I'm going to tell which is questionable. The rest of the stories this week are going to be fair dinkum, honest, genuine, real, true-to-life stories. You'll enjoy those ones. Is there something greater than being able to conjure up a dolphin? Let's have a look at another part of that scroll. We did one passage. We'll just look at one more quickly. My friend here, Michael Hunt from Agape Bible Study, gave me permission to use this. And this is point number 4. And he tells me that another passage here is worth looking at. So I did. I had a look at it. Here's the scroll again. See the little red circle? We're going to go to the second row now, the middle, and have a quick little look and see what it says. Just have a look once again at the brown box, the white with the black lettering, and ask yourself, did Nathan get it right? Have I been fair? Have I accurately transcribed the early Hebrew text into a more modern computerized Hebrew text? And let's read the English translation of that. A voice calls out in the wilderness, prepare a way of the Lord, and in the desert, make a smooth highway for our God. In those days, only the richest, most important people had road crew people in front of them to make the road smooth. Everybody else had to just pick and find their way over all of the obstructions. Let every valley be raised, every mountain and hill be lowered. Let the uneven spots be leveled and the rough places made a plain. That's some pretty serious road work. This must be an important person if they're going to do that much to the valleys and the hills. In those days, they'd normally just do a bit of a smooth job for the chariots. This is level the whole terrain. The glory of the Lord will be revealed. All flesh, not just a couple of people, all flesh, all religions, all worldviews, all cultures, all languages will see it. All flesh, kol basar, the Hebrew term, all flesh will see it. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. According to Matthew, once again, they were pretty sure that this was talking about a particular guy, John the Baptist. This is just a few years later. They believe that John the Baptist was a fulfillment of that expectation on the great Isaiah scroll. Justin Martyr once again says the same thing. I think it was John the Baptist. He was the one who came in the spirit of Elijah, Justin says. Once again, Ignatius says something similar. And look at the dates. These are very, very early dates. This is not hundreds of years later. This is within a generation or two of the event. So even if you say, hey, it's probably a made-up story, you've still got a pretty incredible story spreading out pretty fast. So that's worth noting. Other early church fathers, once again, as before, all saying the same thing. This must be, they say, this is their perspective. But once again, these are all Christians, right? What about the other people? What about those that don't subscribe to that particular worldview? What do they see? Interestingly enough, according to Josephus, for about 500 years, there had been a cessation of prophecy. According to Josephus and those who study him, this is a particular book from Rebecca Gray, who specializes in this, what we call the Second Temple period. She makes this comment, she says, for 500 years, Josephus was confident that the prophetic succession had ceased. That means in the nation of Israel for 500 years, nobody got special words from God until somebody special came along. Who did Josephus think was special enough to reintroduce this prophetic succession? Well, Josephus, not a Christian, says, I think it was John the Baptizer. Wow. That's not my words, those are his words. We probably should read those, but the time is away, so I'll let you catch that on the video later. He actually goes into detail telling us why he thinks John the Baptizer was the one. And by the way, when the Second Temple was surrounded by Titus and his army in 80s or Common Era 70, Josephus tells his own countrymen, the reason God is punishing us is because we mistreated John the Baptizer. Very interesting. The Quran also points to this particular spot as of significance, that John the Baptist also was divinely conceived. He was, in a similar way to Mary, conceived supernaturally because she was beyond the childbearing age. And the commentary is right there. You see the Arabic on the right and the English on the left. This is a Quranic view, and it's a mainstream view. I was reading a book just yesterday, Jerusalem in the Quran, by a respected Muslim author, and he concurs, he agrees with this position. Okay, so just to recap, we've had a look at this young maiden giving birth with a bit of a sign. We've now got the second prediction, where there'd be someone preparing the way for the Messiah. And this is happening not just as a fulfillment in a Christian perspective, but also a Muslim perspective, and in Josephus, his perspective as well. So let's just have a bit of a segue from the story. Let's have a look at Houdini for a minute. Harry Houdini was also a magician. We'll come back to Arion and Periander and finish up in just a few moments. Harry Houdini was a legend. If any of you were alive 100 years ago, you would know that this guy was big in show business. If you went into aviation, as I wasn't around 100 years ago, but if I had been, this guy came to Australia and tried to pull off a stunt. He tried to become the first person to fly an aeroplane in Australia. Unfortunately, according to my understanding, my research, he did not succeed. Somebody else beat him, but he tried. He actually got an aeroplane, popped it in a crate, shipped it across from the States to Australia, put the aeroplane together, went flying, and said, hey everybody, I'm the first guy in Australia to fly an aeroplane. And I forget who it was, but somebody else had already beaten him. So he didn't succeed in that particular trick, but he was certainly that kind of a showman. He was a very well-known stuntman. He was the kind of guy that would be handcuffed, straitjacket, and they'd put him into, like on the right there, a wooden crate, or on the bottom left, a big, huge milk container, a barrel. They would fill it with water, pop his head in there, and he'd tell the audience, okay, everybody hold your breath, see how long you go, and I'm going to be handcuffed in here, hop inside there, head underwater, put a padlock on the lid of this container, please, bring the curtain across, and see how it goes. And of course, all the audience is spellbound. This is before the age of the iPhone. How's he going to get out? How's it going to work out? What if he drowns? And after, of course, 2 or 3 minutes, everybody in the audience who is holding their breath, as he asked them to, are all running out of air. They're panting for breath, they're gasping. Harry Houdini waits a couple more minutes, somehow escapes out of this barrel, comes out from behind the curtain, everybody claps and cheers. Wow, Harry Houdini, he can get out of anything. You probably heard the expression today, he's done a Houdini. That means he's escaped. Houdini was the ultimate escape artist. He was a magician. One day, unfortunately, Houdini was resting in his quarters, and one of his admirers came up to him and said, Mr. Houdini, can I punch you in the stomach? I heard that you've got a six-pack like steel. And Harry Houdini was not quite paying attention, but he said, yeah, that's me. I've got a stomach of steel. And right then, this guy gave him 4 huge punches in the chest, and Houdini wasn't quite ready for it. It really hurt. And Houdini said, okay, stop. That'll do for tonight. A few days went by and he began to get some serious pain in his abdomen. He did a show one night, had a bit of a fever. The doctor said, you better go to hospital, Houdini. He said, no, I'll be all right. Got on the train, went over to the next city, I think it was Chicago. And in Chicago, he, against doctor's advice, performed that show. The doctor said, I think you might have acute appendicitis. You better get to the hospital. Houdini struggled through his show, went to the hospital, and on Halloween, October 31, 1926, Houdini passed away. He was good. He was very good. But he couldn't predict his own future. I just want to run through just about another 30 seconds or a minute. My friend Michael's got a few more predictions here from the Isaiah scroll. There's 19 of them altogether. I'll just run through them very quickly. You can kind of see them there. This one here is very significant because it's also heavily highlighted in the Quran. But a lot of these are very, very interesting and worth studying. If it's once or twice, you say fluke. If it's 3 or 4 times, you say, what are the chances? If it's 19 times, you get suspicious. There's 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And that's only one person's study in one scroll. We've got several other scrolls to look at as well. We won't do that tonight. I want to go back to my friend Arion, the magician, the guy who could play as if he was possessed. I guess he's more of a musician than a magician. He could play like a man possessed. If he really was that good, the skeptic in me says, why didn't he pick another boat? If Arion the musician is good enough to invoke the gods and to summon a dolphin, why not save himself all of the hassle and just pick another boat that wouldn't rob him? Why didn't Arion have that kind of skill? And I guess what I'm trying to question tonight is, what do you think is more impressive? What's the more exciting party trick? Is it more impressive to do A, magic tricks, or more impressive B, to accurately tell the future? Tell your own future. Tell the future of those that you love. Which of those two is more magical? Which is more powerful? A party trick or owning the future? Here's a sign pointing to the moon. What came first, do you think, the sign or the moon? The sign came first, Steve says. So conventional wisdom tells us that the moon comes first, but imagine if there was no moon and the sign was there for thousands of years, and then the moon came in to meet the place where the sign said it should appear. You'd be asking questions about the guy that put the sign there, wouldn't you? If that was really the story. And I want to introduce to you tonight that scroll. The scroll that says, I'm going to point to where the moon is thousands of years before, at least generations before the moon even existed. That Isaiah scroll, no matter how cynical or skeptical you are tonight, that scroll was written, the ink we saw tonight, that very piece of vellum existed at a minimum 100 years before Jesus Christ was born. A minimum. Could be longer. That's the scroll. How did that guy know how to write what it is? There's all kinds of debate today from various scholars that say maybe it was written by somebody, maybe written by somebody else. Maybe 2 guys got together and wrote it at different times. Whatever they decide, this piece of paper predates Christ. This piece of paper was born before Jesus came to Bethlehem. How did that happen? How did those 19 predictions happen? Here is a picture of the monument that is in Italy celebrating the amazing miraculous power of Arion. You can see the naked guy there playing the lyre and a bit of a fountain and a bit of a funny serpentine-looking dolphin, perhaps. People are celebrating this guy Arion. He's pretty amazing. But my question remains, if he really was that amazing, why didn't he pick another ship? Why not pick somebody that wouldn't rob him? That's what I would do if I had that kind of power. If I was really connected to the gods, I'd pick a different god to the one that Arion picked. Likewise with Houdini's magic. If Houdini really was a great, and no disrespect to the poor guy, but if he really had the ultimate magic trick, why didn't he just flex his tummy muscles a few seconds earlier? Why didn't he go to the hospital a few days earlier? In addition to the Messiah, the Isaiah scroll makes one final comment, one final prediction, and I want to just share this with you. This is going to come from the bottom right of the scroll. This is what it says. This is not my words. I'm just reading to you what you can see for yourself at the museum where this scroll resides. This is what the word says. This is the English. I haven't got the Hebrew there. We can go and check it out if you want to afterwards. It says, remember the things I have done in the past, for I alone am God. I am God, there is none like me. Only I can tell you the future before it even happens. Everything I plan will come to pass, for I do whatever I wish. That's the God of the Isaiah scroll. That's a bold claim. And I'm challenging you to think tonight, could there be a bolder claim? Could there be a greater magic than this? What would be more impressive than this? I can't think of anything. We're going to have a quick little discussion in a few seconds here. Magic like Arion and magic like Houdini, telling the future like the Isaiah scroll. This God is claiming to do that kind of thing. If that is really true, how could you trump that? What could be better? I could go to the lotto tomorrow and I could win every single time. I could go to the bank and get a loan and win, because I know the interest rates in the future, every single time. I could go to any event, any sporting match. I could predict every move of my opposition before they even try to score the goal against me. I could do anything. If I could know the future that extensively, what are my limitations? What couldn't I do? So that's the question I have tonight. An inquirer is going to have two choices. Is it going to be A or is it going to be B? Is it more impressive to have magic tricks, or is it more impressive to tell the future? Is it more impressive to impress people with something that maybe is a sleight of hand, or is it something else? Here's a promise I want to leave with you, and then I'll be finished, and then we'll take questions and answers if it works out. This is also from a very early scroll. This predates the Isaiah scroll, and it says this: "Be strong and courageous." This is a promise. "Do not be afraid. Do not panic. For the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you." That's a promise. I'd like to cash in on that one. And I want to thank you for your time tonight. If you have your surveys with you, I do invite you, have a look at those two on the scales. Tell me, A or B, which one's more compelling to you? Which magic trick is better? Some amazing, miraculous sign of wonder, maybe a miracle fire from heaven, somebody turning a frog into a prince. What's more amazing, that or predicting the future? Maybe if I've missed something, maybe you can give me a third option. Maybe there's a third option. Help me out if there is. And at that, I'll leave you with the survey, and I'm happy to take Q&A. For those of you that need to head off, that concludes the formal presentation tonight. And we'll be very honoured to join you again tomorrow night, where the story is going to be Eric, who was a code breaker. He was instrumental in Australia's war efforts in the Second World War. So bring your friends tomorrow. It should be a good story. Okay, here's the first question. It's about carbon dating, and it says this: "What weight of evidence do we use to know if carbon dating is accurate?" That's a good question. How do we know that carbon dating is accurate? Well, as you know, when we try to date things, every time we do something, we try to come up with some sort of a hypothesis and ask ourselves, is this going to work? So in the case of carbon dating, things that are living, things that have carbon in them, they have a particular fingerprint or a particular isotope of carbon-14, and the person that asked the question probably already knows all this data. It's definitely easy to Google or Wiki or whatever. But the question is, how do we know how accurate it is? And the answer is, it depends who you ask and how you tell it. The short story is, there is a consensus viewpoint that we have been able to do enough carbon testing on enough known samples that we are able to have a fairly high degree of confidence when we put in a range. So that particular scroll that I gave tonight, I gave you a range of dates because there is some ambiguity. We can't say it was, January 23, 1527. It's a bit of a analog scale. So there is a correction factor. There is some debate about how accurate this correction factor is. But the journal I quoted for you, and I'll just pull it up here so that you can have the satisfaction of checking it out for yourself. Okay, so the people that carbon dated this particular scroll, I do not believe they were believers. They were actually trying to get a later date. Timothy, A.J. Gill, Douglas J. Donahue, Megan Broshme, Emmanuel Tov, 1995. The journal is called Radiocarbon Dating of Scrolls and Linen Fragments from the Judean Desert. And I've got the volume numbers here. These guys are experts in their field. They're much smarter than I am. They're peer-reviewed, and all their mates are looking for ways to point holes into them. And the dates that I'm sharing with you have been agreed by scholars. So I didn't pick and choose a biased dating person to suit myself. I just took the accepted broad brushstroke view that the scholarship has today. And if someone were to propose another date, the burden of proof would be with the new dating system to convince those that specialise in carbon dating that you've got a better, more accurate system. I'm not an expert in carbon dating, but that's my understanding. Now, there's another question here that says, is there any correlation between Arion's dolphin and Jonah's whale? Wow, good question. The stories are actually quite a similar time, about 500, or Jonah's probably, according to, and by the way, in the cynical, skeptical mindset, most people would see both of those stories as a little bit legendary or mythical. The traditional dating of the Jonah story would be about 200 years before the Periander story. In New Zealand, we also have another story of, what's the whale rider guy called? There's another story from New Zealand where somebody also was riding on a dolphin. So this, yeah, there could be, I don't know, it would be speculation, but yeah, it's interesting parallel. Did you translate the Hebrew from the scroll yourself, or was it translated for you? Okay, so I probably should have pointed out some of the passages, and sorry the screen is cut off. If you saw at the bottom the credit for the translation, that was somebody else. A couple of those passages I did translate myself. I'm not an expert in Hebrew, so I'm happy for you to check my translation and correct it, but I did translate a couple of those passages. The other ones that had the credits, I used the credits that I gave the credit to. Got that one? Okay, the question here is, what chapter and verse talks about the sign who gives birth to Jesus in the Quran? All right, I'll just pull that passage back up. So the person that asked this question, if you just get your pen handy, and I'll just try and find it here. Oh, that was the sign, wasn't it? Let's see. The sign, there we go. Maryam 19 verses, well, there's a different name for it, but 20 and 21. I'm not a scholar, I'm sorry, in the Quran. So chapter 19, verse 20 and 21 is the passage you're looking for there. And there's other references as well. This isn't the only one. There's a good book I saw yesterday, as I said, from what's it called? Jerusalem in the Quran. I'm not trying to be political tonight, but for the Jews and the Muslims, both have legitimate claims to a particular piece of territory, and both are going to their texts to see if the text legitimizes the claim to the territory. So although I wasn't trying to be political tonight, and I have no personal preference one side or the other, it just so happens that this topic does end up being difficult because there are people who have their whole livelihood, their ancestors on both sides that have a lot of tie into that place. And any time that we discuss this topic, even if I'm innocent and have no ill intent, there's always going to be an assumption, hey, maybe he's trying to spin it for this side. Maybe he's trying to spin it for that side. I don't have any preference for either side. I respect both. I've got brothers and friends on both sides. They're both awesome people. And I'm not trying to make a political statement tonight, but I recognize that one is there, so it's a difficult one. Another one, the pilot's ability to stop exactly on the spot may have been a fluke, but it took skill to get there. It was not a trick. Fair enough. And there's a guy here. Is that Mick? Well done, Mick. What a legend. Yeah, I fully agreed. And that's a very good comment to make. And the question would be, a guy of that skill, could he do it again tomorrow? I happened to fly with this guy for about 9 years, and he and I would have competitions about who could park more accurately, and neither one of us were that successful. I think probably 3 or 4 times in a year maybe would see something as accurate as that. We both tried, If I got a better parking job than him, I'd rub it in and vice versa. But even though he was a very skillful pilot and I did my best, I thought I was pretty good as well. It wasn't very common. I mean, we could be close. We could be like, maybe this close. But to get it spot on like that, I'll just show you the picture again because it really is pretty amazing. To get it that close is really hard to do. It's really hard to do. Even if you're skillful, we don't have cameras like cars do. Cool. Any more questions? Any objections? If I missed anything tonight, I'm happy to be corrected. I have a lot of friends that have different worldviews to me. I've spent a lot of time interacting with people that have different perspectives to me, and I've been very careful tonight to share with you only the stuff that is agreed by all groups. I haven't made any special appeals tonight to a particular viewpoint. I've tried to give you a viewpoint based upon a fair, even assessment of what all of my friends would agree upon, including that carbon dating. Cool. I'm done. If you want to come and ask personal questions, is there any more written questions? Otherwise, come see me for a personal chat. I'll be here for another 20 minutes or so. Happy to chat privately. And tomorrow, bring a friend. Tomorrow is going to be Eric, the Aussie codebreaker. You and Eric, the Aussie codebreaker. Tomorrow is going to be a tricky one, but I think you'll enjoy the twists and turns. Good night. Oh, maybe you could